In this September, not this week, but 2 weeks ago, if the world was on its hinges, a lot of you would have been in Trondheim for the STS 2020 roundtable, but as you know, you were not there, and the whole conference was postponed for a year. But as a small kind of, let's say, continuation, or as a kind of an appetizer to next year, because the conference has been moved to September 2021, still in the same location, Trondheim. We don't know what the world will look like then, but hopefully there will be some similarities with where we are at present. SocioTechnical thinking has a vital part of its history in this area, and there is the topic for the conference next year now, participation in the age of blurring organizational boundaries, probably will be kept. But in order to go into learning exercises about how socio-technical thinking might work for us when we deal with organizations and work life in Norway, before we can go into the theory itself, we thought it vital to provide some sort of contextual information, enlightenment, and so on, in order, because an organization is not on its own. It is embedded in a network of institutions and so on, and also in order to embrace the idea of blurring organizational boundaries, meaning that an organization is probably never was a fixed entity. It's a need to understand a bit more of the context. For this, me and my co-organizers, Matthijs Moerkamp of Radboud University, hi Matthijs, and Hanne Finnestrand of NTNU, hi Hanne, succeeded in recruiting the best help that we could get, namely Bjørnstad, who is the chief economist of the main union in Norway, the so-called LO, Landsorganisasjon, which is a confederation of more than half, I think, of organized the workforce in Norway. And LO has been have played a major part in the industrial democracy experiments in the 60s, and of course long before that, and they still do. They are a vital partner and a vital setting up the rules of how the work life works in Norway. So we're very happy to have Roger with us, and I think he needs no further introduction. Please, Roger, when you're ready.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting network. It's true, as Johan says, I'm a chief economist in LO. It's a confederation of trade unions in Norway. So LO is not a trade union in itself, but we have 26 trade unions as members of this confederation. And we have trade union members in all sectors of the economy, and it's a quite vital point when you have to understand how this tripartite model works, because it's a tripartite cooperation, which is the bottom line of this what we call the Norwegian model, or the Norwegian way of solving solving organization at the society level. And tripartite means that it's a cooperation between a Confederation of Trade Unions as LO, and the same on the employer side, and also cooperation with the government. So it's absolutely a way of organizing society and democracy, actually. And I'll try to give a little bit historic background on how this model came about, and an overview of how it works. I've called it the Norwegian supermodel, and the term comes from this front page of The Economist in 2013. It says the Nordic supermodel, but the Norwegian model is one example or a unique model within the more common frame of the Nordic model, because all the Nordic countries has varieties of this tripartite cooperation. And why is it a supermodel, and why has The Economist focused so many pages within this magazine on this model? Well, it's actually because the model is able to combine a social stability with an economic growth model. So this model has shown the world that it's able to generate high economic growth and also distributing the benefits to the whole society, basically. So it's actually a model for the future, because you cannot have high economic growth without distributing it equally to the population, because it's not sustainable. You have to have social sustainability along with economic sustainability. So our model is a model for creating values and distributing values. So I'll try to give you an overview of this. And of course, this is very important in today's world, where you see conflicts. Okay, we had a period of high economic growth, but the growth has been distributed unequally, and we have riots, and we have right extreme forces in many countries. We have Brexit, we have Trump, we have a lot of riots around the world. So this is why the world's eyes has turned to the Nordic countries for an alternative way to organize society. Let me see if I can. How do I do this? There. So for a tripartite cooperation to exist, we have to have three parties. Of course, we have the government, but we need also strong unions and also strong employer confederations. So the vast beginning of this model started maybe when LO was established in 1899, and the first focus on for LO was on actually housing, education, and working. I see that the work has fallen out there. Of course, work is the most important thing for LO today, but also when it was established in 1899. But as a consequence of establishing LO, also the employers starting to organize. And actually only the year after, in 1900, NAF, which later changed their name to NHO, Næringslivets Hovedorganisasjon, was established. It's a confederation of industry, what you call it, industry employers organizations. paralleling LO's organization on the employer side. But the first years during the 1900s were marked with a lot of conflicts. There were the glory day of conflicts in Norway, as in other countries as well. So we did not see this great cooperation yet. The first national agreement, a collective agreement, was in the industries, in workshops in 1907, and it was important because it was the first time in a collective agreement that the employers recognized local representatives and the right to strike, and also set minimum wages. Higher educated workers still had an individual wage setting, but this collective agreement set minimum wages and the right to organize and right to have local representatives, quite important. But then during the 1920s and the early 1930s, there were a lot of disputes, a lot of strikes. It was a lot of conflicts in the Norwegian society as a whole. Then LO in 1935 or in the early 1930s took an initiative to stop all these conflicts and gave out a hand to the employer side, and it resulted in this main agreement in 1935. And we still have this main agreement, and it has actually not changed very much. And in this main agreement, it was recognized throughout the whole society, the right to strike. We had 2-year tariff or collective agreements period, 2-year periods. And the main agreement said that during these 2 years, we have a peace period. You are not allowed to have any strikes or lockouts during this period. But then when you negotiate the collective agreement again, you have the right to strike. So this gave peace to the working life in Norway. And the main agreement also stated another important thing. It stated that the employers had a right to manage, the right to manage the workforce. If employers needed to lay off workers, they had to lay off workers, if the economy, or within boundaries, of course. If the employer needed to reorganize, they were right to reorganize. So we got strikes as a weapon for securing good conditions in working lives, but then we gave also the employers the right to manage, and we signed under a peace period of 2 years. So this was maybe the start of the bilateral cooperation, but still the government is not part of this. Let me try to explain to you what happens during the 1960s. Because after the World War II, we were building the country, we had high employment and high economic growth, but during the 1960s, inflation started to rise. We saw wage spirals and wage price spirals, and the inflation, the high inflation rate held down real wages. So it was a real problem for workers, the high inflation rate. And also Norway, as an exporting country, a small open economy, relied on export incomes. We saw that the high wage growth, because of the full employment or the very high employment rates, the high inflation rate and high wage growth led to loss of competitiveness. So we lost market shares in our international trade. So let me try to explain how the labor market works. You can set up this curve, which shows the relationship between the unemployment level and the real wage level. And of course, when unemployment was very low, as it was in the 1960s, you get a high wage level and you lose competitiveness. But look that we are measuring real wages on the x-axis, or on the is this the y-axis or the x-axis? The y-axis.
Y-axis.
Yeah, the y-axis. We are measuring the real wage level. So we have to take into consideration the price setting as well. And of course, the price setting has an opposite relationship between unemployment and real wages. Because when the employment level is low, employers or businesses want to raise prices. And raising prices lowers real wages. So there is this equilibrium in the labor market that shows this equilibrium unemployment level. But during the 1960s, we had lower unemployment than this, and we experienced high inflation rates, as in other countries as well after the World War II. But what did the Norwegian government do about this? Well, in 1965, there were parliament elections in Norway. And Per Borten, he was running for prime minister, and his main message during the campaign was to fight inflation without increasing unemployment. So he was solving this puzzle that leaders all over the world has wondered about for ages, namely having very low unemployment rates without high inflation. So this is also why the Scandinavian model or the Nordic model also is called the Scandinavian model of inflation, because it's trying to solve high inflation rates without increasing unemployment. So in 1965, Per Borten won the elections and he had to deliver on his campaign. And his solution after the election was to link wages to correct wages. So he had an idea that wages had to be equal to the theoretical level of wages. And what does this mean in this diagram? Well, he was trying, and this is my interpretation, of course, or mathematical interpretation. He was trying to reduce this wage setting curve so that it would generate an equilibrium in the labor market at lower unemployment levels, like this. And then he had to intervene in the wage setting institutions to establish this. So what did he do? Well, he called the head of research in Statistics Norway, called Odd Aukrust, and this is also why the Norwegian model often is called the Aukrust model. A lot of names on this same model, but he gave the assignment to Odd Aukrust to find out what is the right wage level. That's the first part of this. He had to find out what is the right wage level. And Odd Aukrust, he answered after setting down a committee and writing a report that the wage level must be along the main course. And another name of the Nordic model or the Norwegian model is the main course model. So this is why all these names come up. He says the wage level must be along the main course. The main course is the trends in the domestic wage and price development that provide one, normal ownership income in competitive industries. So the surpluses in the competitive sector must be big enough so they don't go bankrupt, basically. And number two, there must be a normal relationship between the wage level in the service industries and the wage level in manufacturing. So it was probably number two that was the most or the new thinking of this, because of course ownership income must be big enough for the industries not to go bankrupt. But why should wages in services follow the wages in manufacturing? Well, his idea is that Norway, as a small open economy with a large exporting sector, the manufacturing industries must be competitive. And they must be competitive both in international product markets, but they also have to be competitive in the domestic labor market. So this was still a theory. He found out what the correct wage level was, and the correct wage level is a wage level that keep the competitive industry going on. And the wage level must be followed by all sectors of the economy, not only the manufacturing industry. So this was still a theory after the reports of Aukrust. Now we had to build institutions that gave this correct wage level. And the solution was, of course, coordinated and centralized wage negotiations. So we actually intervened in the wage setting, the free market of wage setting, to control wage setting. And the confederations that were already there since the early 1900s and the main agreement from 1935 secured that we had tools actually to intervene in the wage setting in this way. And this arrow shows the different collective agreements when they are negotiating or when they are terminated. So in private sector in Norway, the collective agreements is terminated the 31st of March, and the manufacturing industries negotiate first, and the solution to those negotiations are implemented in the following negotiations. So all sectors of the Norwegian economy is following the results from the negotiations in the manufacturing sector. And in public sector, the collective agreements terminates April 30th. So this gives an order of negotiations that makes us implement the theory of correct wages. So the correct wages is the wage level negotiated in the manufacturing industries. And I said we have 2-year collective agreements with a duty of peace and local right to manage by the employers. We have a lot of other institutions also, because this intervention in the wage setting, of course, does not take away the disputes. So we have to have ways to solve conflicts and solve disputes, even though we have a centralized and very highly coordinated wage setting. So we have the contact committee, the labor court, and what we called, it's not the ombudsman, it's the wrong word. I don't know what it's called in English. Riksmekler. It's like a negotiator or a mediator. A mediator. And the contact committee is a committee where the government or the prime minister meets the leaders of the confederations. So and we have a lot of institutions that's trying to help the confederations to reach a correct wage level and also to solve disputes. And we also have the technical committee, TBU, and the first leader was Aukrust himself. And TBU is a committee that are calculating what is the situation in the economy and competitiveness before negotiations start. And all the parties are represented in TBU, or the technical committee. So the idea is that those who negotiate wages, they don't have to negotiate on what is the situation. What is the current situation? So this is This has the technical committee already agreed on. And we also have a very important institution within Statistics Norway, which is a research department. Why was this important? Because we constructed an economic model that has never been seen before. So we had to research on the consequences on this kind of wage setting for the economy. And the Statistics Norway's research department start building up macroeconomic models instead of the textbook macroeconomic models which we learn from University of the United States and so on, which actually would disagree very much on this way of intervening into the wage setting. So we have to build our own macroeconomic models in help for policy. So did we deliver on these two criteria of Aukrust? Let us see. Normal ownership income in competitive industries. In the graph on your left-hand side, you can see the wage share of value added. And the rest of it is, the capital income share. And this is in manufacturing industries. And as you see, there are large fluctuations in the wage share or the capital income share, as it is the inverse of this. But the fluctuations are around a constant. So over time and altogether, competitive industries in Norway has had large surpluses, enough to keep a competitive exporting sector. So yes, this wage setting produces normal ownership income in competitive industries. And in the figure in the right, you can see how wage growth is. I'm sorry, it's in Norwegian, but the blue one, or the light blue, is all groups, or the total economy, wage growth in the total economy. And the red one is in manufacturing industries. And the gray one is in public sector, or the government actually, or the state, not the municipalities. But as you see, wage growth is quite or almost identical in the whole country as it is in the manufacturing industries. So we are delivering on both those theoretical arguments of Aukrust all up to today, actually. And in these last years, the discipline has been very strong. All sectors of the economy follows to the decimal the wage growth in the manufacturing industries. So we have a very highly coordinated wage setting still. So let me sum up. What is the Norwegian model? Where the core of the model is the coordinated wage setting. And why do we do this? Yeah, we do this because we want full employment without inflation, high inflation. But if you ask today, what is the Norwegian model? You will not get this answer. Everybody puts whatever into the term Norwegian model. Gender equality, some may say, is the Norwegian model. High level of trust is the Norwegian model. A large government sector is the Norwegian model. A welfare state is the Norwegian model. But my argument is that this is the core of the model. But from this, it has large consequences that unions and confederation of unions have so much powers, and actually the large share of unions in Norway, they have agreed not to bargain wages because we're just following the manufacturing industry. So why should unions, and how should unions say no to bargain wages? Well, there are assumptions that has to be met, and there are policies that has to be done in order to make the unions not bargain wages. So everything that follows from this and that is unique to the Nordic models or the Nordic economies, stems out from this coordinated wage setting, is my argument. So what are the consequences of this? Well, I've split the consequences in two sets of consequences. The first one is that having strong parties participating or intervening in wage setting gives us actually a policy tool. We have strong parties with a lot of members that in a way secures democratic decisions. And sorry, again, there's some Norwegian there, but what do I mean by it's a policy tool? Well, if you want to make some changes in Norway, for example, a pension reform, you involve the unions. Because if the unions agree with the employer confederations as well, you secured a democratic decision on how to construct the pension reform. So we have actually a policy tool to solve a lot of problems in society, new problems in society. So because of the strong parties in working life, we have been able to construct reforms. We have been able to design pension schemes. We have been able to secure quite a bit of gender equality. We have a highly intensive work on inclusive employment. That means that we have a work of including sick and disabled people into the working life. And we also participate highly in educational policies. These are all examples of how we can use the strong parties in working life to obtain other goals in the society. And this is why also you can hear that the Nordic model or the Norwegian model is all these other things, because we are able to. We are able to reach other goals because of the strong unions participating in tripartite cooperation. But I also have to mention that even in the business level, strong parties are constructive. They are participating in restructuring businesses. We are also involved in downsizing on the business level. We are involved in increasing competence and in recruitment. By the way, this figure shows the Gini index. All the Nordic countries score the lowest levels. That means that we are the most equal countries in the world. So this is one set of consequences having strong parties in working life, namely as a tool to reach other goals as well. The other set of consequences is the market response to controlling or intervening into the wage setting. And economists, mainstream economists, were not very happy to see how the Nordic countries intervened into the free market of wage setting. They said that this would hinder growth. They said that having unions deciding wages would produce high unemployment rates, would produce high wages, would hinder flexibility in the labor market. So this was a model for low economic growth and would eventually fall apart. But now there has been like 60 years of experience of this Nordic model or the Norwegian model, and the result is the quite opposite. Controlling wages, intervening into the wage setting, actually generates high economic growth, not low economic growth as predicted. And why is that? Why does small wage gaps, why is small wage gaps good for growth? There are several reasons. At the company level, when the low educated workers are expensive, then you as a business leader want to invest in technology instead, because technology substitutes manual labor. So in the Norwegian businesses, when facing a very expensive, low educated workforce, invest highly in digital solutions, machineries, technology, and also in a lot of labor saving processes, organizing the workforce and so on. And also there's a strong incentive to replace the unskilled with skilled. So the demand for skilled workers are very high in Norway. And also at the business structure, small wage gaps has positive consequences, because those businesses that are having problems with profitability, what would they do when wage setting is individualistic? Well, they would go to their workforce and say, we are almost bankrupt. You have to lower your wages to keep us alive. This is not possible in Norway. You cannot, as a business leader, go to your workers and ask them to lower their wages, because the wage setting is national. So what do? Well, you have to let the businesses with go bankrupt and lay off workers. So this is a way of Schumpeter's 1942 article of creative destruction. We are getting rid of low productive industries because we don't let them lower the wages. So why do unions want to make the workers lose their jobs rather than lower their wages? Well, this is why we demand a welfare state, because we see that there are great benefits of having a flexibility in the business sector. Then we have to have income security schemes alongside with it. So this is the reason why we have a welfare state, basically. And another growth argument of small wage gaps or small differences is that we are able to create a society of high levels of trust. And we can see now from research the last decades that trust is very profitable. Trust is one of the most important assumptions for having good cooperation and high growth in modern economies. So the consequences is that Norway scores the most on digitalization. This is just a newspaper article in Norwegian, I'm sorry, but it says that in technology indexes, Norway is always among the top countries. We are implementing new technologies and digitalization in a high pace because manual workers are so expensive. And we're also the most productive workforce in the world. This is GDP per working hours. And you can see that we are just above United States. Only a few years ago, we were about 20% above United States in productivity. But because of the weakening of the krona after the oil price falls in 2014, and later now also because of the corona, we have, because these figures are corrected for purchasing power. So we are just above United States in productivity, but still the world's most productive workforce. So the model generates growth in high pace. I just have to skip that because I think I spent too much time already. This is the last slide. I'm just going to say that also even though we have very nice or growth enhancing consequences of the Norwegian models, there are also conditions that has to be met. And these things are the things we are struggling with also in Norway, because we are experiencing that these conditions are being are threatened. We have to have collective agreements, otherwise you cannot coordinate across sectors. And in some sectors, there are just too few members of unions to achieve collective agreements. And of course, this is a problem when you have a highly coordinated wage setting. So in these sectors, there are more individualistic wage settings, and that's a threat to the Norwegian model. You also have to have policy that is friendly to unions, if you know what I mean. Because if you have a policy of inequality, for example, right-wing governments maybe want to lower taxes, reduce public sectors, reduce the redistribution of income, then why should unions not negotiate higher wages? Another example, if the parliament take control over working life and not the collective agreements, why shouldn't you use your power to take control of working life again? So you have to have policy supporting unions, and this is why we have a tradition for a social democratic policy. Even the right-wing parties in Norway follows what you can call a social democratic policy. And also, last but not least, we have to have institutions that support the coordinated wage settlements. The institutions I mentioned earlier, for example. That is not threatened, but policy is threatened because of globalization and technology, and because of many people is outside working life, and the right-wing policy might win in the discussion on how to deal with this, namely cutting the welfare state, tax reliefs on capital, cuts in public sectors, and so on. So the first two conditions are actually threatening Norwegian models today. I am aware I've spent too much time, so I'm sorry for that, but I think I'll stop right now.
But thank you, Roger. I think it was really well spent time. So it was really interesting, and I think that you, in the end of your introduction, you also said something about what does this mean for on the organizational level for those of us who work with organizations. In what way is this affecting? What tools do we have? What's like the scene for those of us who work with organization design? For example, the use of technology. How this model is also enabling or kind of forcing more use of technology instead of lower payment or de-skilling people, really, and also how this is how this model is also an incentive for hiring skilled people. So I mean, you are really given us a very good introduction to discussing social technical systems theory on company level with this introduction. So thank you very much, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good luck on the rest of the seminar, and I see you tonight as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. See you.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah. So Roger has to leave us, but we will continue. I really like this introduction. I hope that you learned more about the building bricks of the sociotechnical systems theory in Norway and how we deal with it. So how does this macro model that Roger just presented influence or inform organizational design, understood as sociotechnical systems theory in Norway? Those of us who work within STS on a company level most of us kind of think of ourselves as action researchers. And I'm not going more into that. I see that David Greenwood is here. He wrote like the Bible on action research. So I'm not daring going into the field of explaining what it is. But in any case, it's about how can we as researchers try to make changes together with the companies, try to improve the conditions, both the working conditions, but also efficiency in the companies. So that's what we have done for many, many years. And we have also worked most of the time within manufacturing company. And as you learned from Roger, that is the industry that is very much leading the way when it comes to the wage system and the Norwegian, what you call the Norwegian model, and many, many other names. Organizational design in this Norwegian context built on union management cooperation. And as you learned, the cooperation between the union and the management is very, is kind of the, defining the Norwegian model in a sense, but it's also give us the tools for what we can do on company level. So 50% of the workforce in Norway is member of a union. And in manufacturing companies, at least the larger ones, more or less all the employers, all the employees are member of the union. So when doing organizational design, when working with STS, we have to take the union into consideration. And how we do it, this is to invite them in the development projects that we do in the companies. That gives us some positive arenas, I would say, for communication, for finding out what the bottlenecks are, to involve the employees. But it's also create an egalitarian model for how to deal with, for example, skill development. It's a very collective model. We cannot work with individual solutions, for example. It doesn't make sense in this context. So how do we deal with skill development among people where we have to deal with it in a collective sense? How do we deal with motivation? How do we motivate people for going into organizational design projects when we don't have tools like individual payment, for example, because that is also dealt with in a very egalitarian way, in a very flat structure. So this is also informing us as action researchers within the area of STS. Yeah, Roger mentioned also pension schemes, gender inequality, diversity on the company level. All these things are dealt with on a macro level. So we don't have to start from the scratch in companies. We can start on a higher level. So that is also affecting how we work as action researcher or consultants within STS. So with this, few words, I think it's time for us to discuss among us in groups.
What we are going to do in the coming, well, let's say 10 to 15 minutes, and I realize that some people may have to leave due to other plans, and of course feel free to do so, is to have a quick wrap up of the discussions that we had in the subgroups. For this, I'm going to ask, let me first have the group layout here, ask one person, or actually one group at a time, if one person is willing to share the results or the opinions or the discussion that went on in the particular group. And I wanted to start, of course, with room 1, and that's the group of Johan, I think. But
yeah.
who is willing? Yeah, Peter.
But yeah, I said I'd talk or share our discussions with you because I got carried away and spoke for too long. But I found the presentation very interesting, and I was just saying to our group, I wish we had that Norwegian model in Australia, because some of the organisations I work with, the unions and management are at loggerheads, and you know, you've got to overcome all the industrial disputes before you could even start talking about socio-technical systems. So to have a more social democratic thinking at the macro level and in setting wages would make life more easy for me in doing redesigns. So, for instance, Merrill and Emery, I just completed a project to redesign a national disability care provider. So they got businesses providing, or the businesses providing services to people with low and high care disability needs. But before Marilyn and I our first program was to train people in the participative design workshop, and that was supposed to take 3 days. Because there was so much tension between the unions and management, it took us 2 days before we could actually get them together and talk about the participative design workshop. And that was over wages and conditions and all that sort of thing. So having a model like the Norwegian model would make life more easy and have that high levels of cooperation, and as Roger was saying, trust between the different parties is critical. The other question that I did ask is, because you have high wages, and if I'm an employer and I'm employing people that are doing manual tasks, I will tend to automate that task and not have to pay for those high wages. So I was just wondering what happens to those people who are displaced by technology. But the group did tell me that there are safety nets to support those people, opportunities to learn new skills and competencies, and those skills and competencies are transferable, so you could leave one organisation and move to another. So yeah, I really liked that presentation, and it gave me a lot of insights into what we haven't got here.
Yes, thanks Peter for bringing this as a discussion of group 1.
Yeah. But did I miss out anything, Johan? Is there anything else that my group wanted to talk about? No. Okay.
All right. For group 2, Trond.
Yes, we kind of started out from the presentation and had present in the room. It was Holland and US and Norway. So basically, the other participants from the other countries had to just to sum up what about their reflections on what has been presented. So we started actually with more from the centralized Norwegian model, what was presented with the wage setting and so on. But actually, at least we with the Dutch, we ended up with discussing very much about more kind of internal in the companies, because the setup in Holland and maybe, I don't know if you have some Germans here, they may add in, but these work councils and the way they operate within the companies is pretty interesting. what it looks like is that the work councils in Holland and in Norway is pretty much set up in the same way. So addressing as addressing specific or all important topics in the company. If it goes from downsizing, organizational change, and so on, it has to go through the work councils, and that's pretty important arenas for developing the companies. And talking from the company I'm sitting in, it's the work council will meet monthly, and as part of this democratic system within the companies, we also have department bodies that are able to be part of the decision making at the department level. So this was pretty interesting to dive into, because it was a lot of similarities. Mm-hmm. I can't say that about the US, but probably David can fill in there. But it was less regulated in the US, so to speak. So it was even some thoughts about the way it was set up, or with less unionized people, it's not the same. So they're obviously struggling, and it's not getting better at what we can see from now. So I believe that was kind of a sum up from the group 2. I don't know, please fill in.
Anybody something to add? I think you did an excellent job, of course. Okay, the last 3, group 3, who's willing to say something?
I could try, and
Hanne.
then the rest of the group can fill in if they feel that I'm not doing them right. There were actually, I would say that there were 2 main topics that we were discussing on our group. One of them is what happens when the company structures changes now. I mean that we see large changes in, for example, in Germany, you see huge changes within the car manufacturing industry. What happens if oil is not the issue anymore in Norway? What do we do then? And they were also talking about similar things in Madrigal. So we had people from Madrigal, from the Czech Republic, and from Germany, and all of us were discussing these issues on going through digital and green transitions. In what way is this model able to deal with these changes, and what does it mean? Will it look the same in the future, for example? So we were also, we would like to ask Roger about these things. You know, what are really the threats in the future when it comes to the model, when we see these huge changes that we're going through now. The other issue that we were discussing is really trust. In what way is trust an enabler for organizational development, and in what way can it also lead to slow development, and in what way is this Norwegian model also created for flexibility and changes, and in what way is it really slow, being very slow, involving everybody? Everybody has to have a voice, everybody has to be taken into consideration, and this idea of being faster. So those were the 2 things. If the group has something to add.
Also not. Oh wait.
Oh,
no,
okay.
You all did an excellent job in summarizing the discussion.
Yeah, we agreed. We agreed that trust is really a wonderful thing. That is less expensive. Yeah, it creates flexibility. It's good in that sense. Mm-hmm. But but how do we develop that? How do we build on that? Yeah.
Just to add one sentence to that, I think it's a question of dynamics and stability, because what the core of the Norwegian model is, it's very much oriented towards stability and cooperation. And cooperation and building trust needs time.
Mm.
Therefore, what happens with when disruptive changes occur?
Mm.
So what is going on, and how can a system like this react on high dynamics? And that's the basic question behind, I think. And what especially Martina mentioned is how can a reaction in these systems transfer the system to a new state and be able to provide adequate answers to the change needs or change demands.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point. All right.
Matthijs, can I just comment on what Peter said? Peter said something about the safety net that Roger was mentioning. And I just want to say that, yes, what do we do with employees that are falling out of working life because they are de-skilled and they are being automated, so to speak? And the problem in Norway now is that we have a huge amount of people who are out of work, who are in this, who now live in this safety net, and they are probably going to stay there for the rest of their life. Yeah, that is a huge issue. That's a problem. Yeah.
Hanne, may I add something here? I think a fundamental difference, what we had, let's say, 60s, 70s, 80s, when we talk about automation and what we are experiencing now with digital transformation, there's a fundamental difference here. One of the difference, at least that I see, is that with automation, it was primarily focused on repetitive routine work, yeah? And what we see now more and more, that digital is also entering, some say even, let's say the non-routine work, what we call professionals, even in the decision-making elements. So that means that a larger, let's say, especially modern economies, which are much more, let's say, knowledge-based, that the technology is also entering that area of the economy, which might also have a larger effect on the economy, because what else is there after, let's say, a major part of the work of professionals would be automated? What's left? What kind of work is left?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I'm looking to Johan for. We're coming up to the final part of the workshop. I think we had a lovely presentation, a super interesting presentation by Roger, and fantastic discussions in the different panels. And I want to give the words to Johan, if that's all right with you, to give a sneak peek until the next one, to the next webinar.
Thanks, Matthijs, and thanks for still being here on overtime to all of you. We will repeat this effort this evening, and then it will be interesting to see how a crowd of a lot of US Americans and Canadians will reflect on the same topics as we have done this morning. Next week on Tuesday, this contextual introduction will serve us as a context for going into when given this a more for your part knowledgeable insight into the environment of the organizations. How does SocioTechnical organizational development work and intervention? How does it work within the system, and what kind of strategies and methods have we tried to use? What was the historical methodologies that were developed in the 60s, and how does it compare to what we are trying to struggle with at the moment? That will be the main content of coming Tuesday next week. So of course we hope to see all of you there for for a further. Well, it will be a sneak peek because it will only be 90 minutes, and we hope that it works also as a kind of an appetizer, so that you want that you know that that the thing that is firmly in your agenda is that September 2021 you're coming to Trondheim to go really into depth with these issues. So I guess that was probably enough. Thanks to all of you for participating today, and see you soon, all of you.